The Tamatoa Item Ramp deck was a bit of a joke last set, however thanks to Pawpsicle in Rise of the Floodborn, Tamatoa is now With this deck in the early game, we really want to get our item engine running. This will allow us to rapidly build a card and ink advantage over our opponent through our ramp tools. In the mid to late game, we're going to take advantage of those extra resources and play our Ruby control cards to eliminate our opponent's board presence, thus swinging the tempo in our favor. After establishing board control, we can safely quest the game. Then our only problem is deciding how we're going to spend all of our card and ink advantage before going on to win the game. Pawpsicle is a 1-cost item with 2 abilities. The first one is the most important, and it's Jumbo Plot. When you play this item, you may draw a card. The second one you're going to use a lot less often, and that's Redwood. Banish this item, then remove up to 2 damage counters from a chosen character. The reason using the second ability isn't ideal should hopefully become more clear to you as we go through the video. Honestly, this is probably the hottest card in the deck despite it being a Pawpsicle. It's a great way to cycle through your deck, which effectively thins it, making it more consistent, and it only comes at the cost of 1 ink. Judy Hops is a 3-cost inkable, 2 free that quests for 2. This has the very important ability of Don't Call Me Cute. When you play this character, you may banish a chosen item and then its player draws a card. This means it can be used as removal for your opponent's items, but in most cases we want to be using it on our own items, ideally the Pawpsicle, so that we can keep drawing cards. It's not as ideal, but you can also banish a Shield of Virtue if you're in need of card draw to cycle through your deck. Ram Flavasham is a 4-cost 1/6 that quests for 1. It has the incredible ability, even better than Judy Hops, of the Artificer. When you play this character and whenever he quests, you may banish an item and draw 2 cards. This is a much better way to recycle our Pawpsicles, and we can do it each time we quest. It does make it a very high threat card for your opponent to deal with. Not only are we questing for 2, but we're also able to draw from the card. It makes it quite important to be careful with where you quest if it can be traded into. If you're lucky enough to build at least 2 items on board in the early game, it could be played the turn after Judy Hops. Ram Flavasham and Judy Hops are really the bread and butter of this deck, with the Pawpsicle being the Marmite. If you're a Marmite hater, don't let me know in the comments. Now you may be wondering how we're going to keep our draw engine going if we're banishing all of our items. Well, that's where Nick Wild comes in. Nick Wild is a 4-cost 2/4 that quests for 2. With the incredible ability, it's called a Hustle. When you play this character, you may return an item card named Pawpsicle from your discard to your hand. This is an amazing way to recycle the card, much like Nick Wild does himself in the movie Zootopia. This is the core loop of the engine that allows us to keep pumping resources to be able to ramp with and just, play and control the board. 2/4 is quite a weak stat line for 4 costs, but the effect is just too good to pass up. And luckily, once he's on the board, he's already done his job anyway. For our last cog in the item engine, we have Tamatoa, an 8-cost 5/8 that quests for 1. I've always had a soft spot for Tamatoa, mainly because he's voiced by Jermaine Clement, so I'm really happy to be able to see him competitively viable going into Rise of the Floodborn. What makes him so good in this deck, especially in set 2, not only can he recycle Pawpsicle on play just like Nick can, but he can also do it every time he quests, and he can recycle item cards other than Pawpsicle. To top it off, in the endgame, when we've built up such an item and resource advantage, we can take advantage of the ability Glam, which allows Tamatoa to get +1 quest for each item we have in play, which is an amazing finisher once we've established that board presence. I would be careful though to only play Tamatoa once you've exhausted your opponent of their control resources, because if he gets taken out by a Hades, Dragonfire, or a Maleficent, then he's probably not worth spending the 8 ink. Next up we have our ramp cards. First is Grandma Tala, another Moana character. They are a 2-cost inkable 1/1 that quests for 1, which sounds pretty bad, but the catch is that when they're banished, they send themselves to your inkwell face down and exerted. This gives us a delayed ramping effect compared to other ramp cards we see in Sapphire. But what makes this really strong, due to that negative effect when they're banished, you can just keep questing with Grandma Tala and applying a threat that your opponent has to weigh up the decision of if they want to give you more resources next turn, or if they just want to keep giving you 1 lore turn after turn. Even at a 1/1 stat line, you can still challenge certain aggressive threats that have high quest, like Lilo, Pinocchio, and Enchantress. A really cool combo we could do to sort of triple dip on the value of Grandma Tala is that on turn 3 we can sing with 1 jump ahead, because we don't really care if Tala's being exerted, which allows us to put another card from the top of our deck into our Inkwell face down and exerted. And then after that, we can play Teeth and Ambitions. Teeth and Ambitions is a 2-cost song card, which lets us deal 2 damage to an opposing character, but at the cost of dealing 2 damage to one of our characters. So really, that's just a win-win, because we're going to be able to hit an opposing character and ramp ourselves at the same time. And if you were able to 1 jump ahead already before playing this card, that's just a whole lot of value. In certain situations, Grand Martella isn't as good as 1 jump ahead if you need to play a 4-cost card on turn 3, so be mindful of that when you're mulliganing. Fishbone Quill is a classic ramp card from set 1 that honestly wasn't as impactful as you'd liked because of a massive cost of needing so much card advantage to work. But luckily for us, the Pawpsicle Engine has solved that downside. It is a free cost inkable with the ability of every turn you can put any card from your hand into your Inkwell face down. This, in a way, turns some of our uninkable cards, which we have a lot of in the deck, into inkable ones while having Fishbone Quill on the board. This means that every turn we can ink from Fishbone Quill and maybe even ink from another source. You can see how this gets very out of hand very quickly, and we can establish such an overwhelming resource advantage. The key to this card is knowing when to not use it, because if you use it too often and we end up out of control options in order to stabilize the board, then our opponent could just run away with the game before we can flip the tempo. Definitely be very mindful of this card in the mulligan, because it can be quite good to keep. You end up with a hand full of uninkables. It's really important to hit this on turn 3 so that you can keep inking. Next up, we have the new Ruby Song control card that I mentioned earlier. It is a 2-cost inkable with the ability to deal 2 damage to a chosen character of yours, and after paying that cost, you can deal 2 damage to a chosen character of your opponent's. What obviously makes this really strong is that we can use Grand Martella as a cost to both benefit off of the Grand Martella being banished and targeting our opponent. Be very mindful of how you use this card and how you mulligan for this card, because depending on the matchup, this is our only form of early removal, as we don't see other forms of removal until turn 5 and 6. Lady Tremaine is a really interesting card that's come in set 2. It's essentially a Maleficent on a turn 6 body, but with the catch that your opponent gets to choose what they banish. Most of the time, this cost doesn't really matter, as you can manipulate the board to the point that your opponent only has 1 card left. So if you can remove another character, be it through challenging or be it through another removal tool, then Lady Tremaine is just a discounted Maleficent. It may not have the best stat line at 3 for 4, and it's uninkable, so we don't run too many in the deck, but it still quests for 2, so it's a very good card that your opponent should respect. Next, I've sort of batched all our set 1 single target removal together, because I'm sure you have all heard why these cards are so good over and over, but I'll give you a quick rundown for anyone who doesn't know. The reason Dragonfire, Maleficent, and Hades are so good is because they all carry the ability to choose an opponent's character and banish one of them. This means regardless of stats, you can take out any character in the game. This is very helpful for when a character is not exerted or when they're simply too tough to take out. The only cards that we can't target with these are ward cards, a big one being Kuzco, so do be mindful of that when you're playing your games. What's really strong about Maleficent and Hades especially is that they also come with a body that quests for a good amount. So once you've taken out an opponent's character, you have the body on the board to keep questing and applying pressure that way. This is what we call swinging the tempo, when you take out your opponent's board control and establish your own. You can also swing the tempo with Dragonfire, but it requires you to already have a 5-cost out on the board, say maybe a Maui you traded with last turn that you can then sing with and play another card. Like other versions of this deck, thanks to the Pawpsicle Fishbone draw and ramp engine, we can actually hit these cards a lot quicker than you could traditionally, making them very good tools to control the mid game, which will allow us to stabilize a lot earlier than usual. Next up, we have our rush cards, Maui and Scar. I'm sure you all know about Maui, but if you haven't heard about Scar yet, just like Maui has the ability Rush, which allows you to deal with your opponent's exerted characters on the board. While the Scar comes with the incredible effect of once it challenges and banishes another character, it then re-readies itself, which could then essentially protect the Scar from a counter attack on your opponent's next turn, or allow you to swing again to clear multiple threats on the board. Unlike Maui, Scar does not have Reckless, so it does not need to attack each turn if it doesn't want to, and it can quest if it wants to. Lastly, we have the Boogeyman of Ruby. I'm sure you all know it from last set's Ruby Amethyst control, and that is Be Prepared. What a meta-defining card, honestly. It's so meta-defining to the point that every aggro deck in the game wants to win before turn 7, because this threat is just that scary. So what if I told you we could get a Be Prepared on turn 5? Heck, if you're really lucky, maybe even turn 4. This is thanks to our insane draw and ramp engine. This means that if your opponent's playing a very aggressive, very wide board, we can reset it play it a lot faster than we normally would be able to with a traditional control list. Remember that if you do have a 7 cost or higher on the board, you want to use a Be Prepared to deal with a wide amount of threats. Make sure to sing your 7 cost to play the Be Prepared so you don't use any ink. This means that once we've reset the board, we can then play our own cards afterwards, thus establishing and putting the board tempo in our favor. The last thing to keep in mind is that this is a perfect counter to your opponent trying to play around Lady Tremaine so that they can avoid the banish effect, or even just single target removal in general. What makes this deck so versatile is that we have the ability to draw into so many cards, but that at almost any point we will have multiple removal tools at our disposal, which will allow us to choose the most efficient ones to clear the current threat. This really is the key to success with a control deck, because you don't want to be inefficient with your removal and waste resources, giving your opponent some breathing room to outpace you and win the game. Noi is probably the card in the deck that I could most see removing. It's really just there because it's a good card and it happens to synergize really well with our turn 1 items. If we do play a Shield of Virtue or a Popsicle on turn 1, with this 2 cost inkable 1/2 that quests for 2, we will also gain resist +1 and ward. This makes it very, very sticky and hard for our opponent to remove, which means we can apply a lot of early pressure, giving us some breathing room to start setting up our draw engine to gain card advantage and to ramp to be able to build resources, be able to deal with whatever board our opponent's able to build. I would be careful with this card in the mulligan. I really wouldn't want to keep it over, say, a Grand Martala if we don't have a 1 cost item to play. For our final section of the video, we have some alternate options, but I didn't end up including in the deck. The first one is a card I have seen other people including in the deck. I know the list I've been inspired by, which was Zef's list, was running Let It Go, and the reason I don't really like it in this deck is because compared to Dragonfire, it actually gives our opponent an advantage by placing the banished character into their inkwell. Normally the plus side of this is that Let It Go is inkable and is able to sing, but we don't care about Let It Go being inkable as we would in a traditional deck, because Dragonfire can be inked by use of Fishbone Quill. And even if we did want to sing with Let It Go, the only 5 cost I can imagine we'd want to sing with is Maui. And there aren't any 5 costs or higher I would be willing to exert for the cost of a Let It Go, when we could just run Dragonfire and ignore that entirely. If you were seeing a lot of early aggressive decks, especially amber ones, I would recommend running Felicia. This is a 1-drop, free 1, which makes it amazing for dealing with cards like Simba and any other high threat free health card, and any other high threat free toughness cards. This does help shore up our early game against aggressive decks, but it also gets in the way a bit of the consistency of our item engine, which should hopefully let us reset the board against aggressive decks anyway. Next we have Cruella de Vil. In a similar sense, I'm really glad cards like these were printed, because if we start to see a super big evasive meta, maybe red-green evasives, we can't really deal with the board in any way, especially with our rush cards, except for a Be Prepared or any of our single target removal, then we could end up wanting a Cruella de Vil in the early game in order to slow down our opponents because of its ability to target evasives on its own turn. This will only really be an issue if we're going up against free health evasives, because otherwise we could use Teeths and Ambitions to remove those evasive cards in the early game until we're able to ramp and stabilize. This never really was an option that I considered because this card's awful, it sucks. I keep seeing people running Dinner Bell. Why? It's so bad. I just wanted to put this in the video to say stop running this card. Like, it's a 4-cost, uninkable, tap for 2, banish one of your own cards in order to draw cards equal to the damage on chosen character of yours. Even if you're running that Mother Gothel, this is such a clunky card that you shouldn't be playing in any deck, if I'm being honest. Like, I don't see this card being useful in set 2 at least until further cards are printed. I guess I'll bite my hat if I'm wrong on this, but yeah, don't run Dinner Bell. It's awful. Aurora is a serious consideration in this list. It's a 5-cost inkable, free 5 that quests for 2, which is pretty nice, but the important part is its ability. Protective Embrace gives your other characters ward. This synergizes amazingly with our Flavasham, can't even remember the name of the card anymore, I think that's it, and Tamatoa, by essentially protecting them from single target removal through ward. The reason why we're not running it in the list is that it's honestly just a bit too clunky, a bit too slow. There's not enough space in the deck. I think it's a bit greedy to run Aurora because we have so much card advantage. If we're winning and we have board control, we even really care if our cards are removed. We can just play more of them. Anyway guys, thanks for watching. I hope you'll have as much fun with this deck as I did. Rise of a Floodborn is an absolute blast. I just wanted to give you guys a little PSA. Going back home to visit friends and family, I'll be trying to keep videos coming out once a week, and I'm working on recording some videos as a backlog in the meantime, but please be patient with me otherwise, and thanks for all your support so far.